The Nile River gushes out of Lake Victoria in Jinja as a torrent and runs an estimated 4,160 miles en route to the sand-colored landscape in Egypt on its way to the Mediterranean Sea. As a result of this complex hydrological background, the Nile's catchment area is shared by 10 countries, better known as the Nile riparian states, which are Egypt, Sudan, Ethiopia, South Sudan, Uganda, Kenya, Rwanda, Burundi, Tanzania, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Sudan, being the third largest country on the continent by geographical occupation, has the largest share of the Nile Basin. In total, the River Nile drains about 10% of the African continent. One of the ancient civilizations of the world, Egypt, has relied on colonial veto powers to monopolize this fabled waterway for decades. But a collective approach from other countries that share this jewel of the crown has threatened Egypt's tight grip over the River Nile. The river has for generations gone by been and continues to be a principal source of livelihood for hundreds of communities around it. But with the ever-changing socio-economic dynamics such as high population growth, climate change, infrastructure development, and environmental degradation, the demand for water is fast rising. With the East and Horn of Africa countries ramping up their firepower, fear is beginning to creep in that the Nile could be a tinderbox for conflict. The Nile riparian countries are currently engaged in shuttle diplomacy to avert any possible conflict and start a new chapter over sharing the River Nile waters. International actors such as the World Bank and the European Union have been central in pushing such efforts, which started with the establishment of the Nile Basin Initiative in 1999 as a platform for dealing with the divergent opinions. Last month, the Ugandan government announced it had ratified the Cooperative Framework Agreement. It is a new agreement on sharing the River Nile waters that seek to replace the colonial agreements signed by the British colonial administration in 1929 and 1959, granting powers over the river to Egypt and Sudan. Uganda's sudden ratification of the new Nile deal comes at a time when the government is toiling with the idea of constructing more hydropower dams, a move Egypt is closely watching. The proposed dams include Makshon Falls with a capacity of 650 megawatts, Ayago 840 megawatts, Oriang 392 megawatts, Kiba 300 megawatts, and Uhuru 300 megawatts. Water and Environment Minister Sam Cheptoris says signing of the new agreement was long overdue.
Did not want to ratify because it felt that we must all go together, including Egypt and Sudan. So Uganda waited, thinking that we would come to an agreement. All of us would come together and sign. Unfortunately, this has not been the case. It is only sometime 1 month ago that His Excellency the President directed that CFA should be ratified.
Negotiations over the Cooperative Framework Agreement started in 1997, but it was only signed in 2010. But even then, Sudan, Egypt, and the Democratic Republic of Congo declined to put signature to paper. Only 6 countries, Uganda, Ethiopia, Tanzania, Kenya, Rwanda, and Burundi, signed the new agreement. Of the 6 countries that signed, only Rwanda, Tanzania, and Ethiopia ratified the new agreement and deposited the instruments of ratification at the African Union. Uganda's ratification can only come into force after depositing the instruments with the African Union Secretariat in Addis Ababa. Cheptoris told NTV that there is increasing need for water by Uganda.
We have not exploited the Nile the way Egypt has done. Because when you go to Cairo, for instance, you will see how much they are benefiting from the water. You have floating hotels, you know, some of the boats, you can have a boat cruise where you have lunch and what have you on the boat. So Uganda, we need really to to tap more. We need our private sector to invest in tourism on River Nile. We really need it. And then, of course, it is also true that we have not really used the waters of the Nile, for instance, for irrigation.
The new agreement is contested by Egypt, where the Nile is its economic pulse. To the Egyptians, the Nile also means life, as one Egyptian army colonel, while writing on the Egypt-Sudan relations in 1949, observed that, I quote, "The Nile to Egypt is a matter of life and death. If the water of the river were controlled by a hostile state, or a state that could become a hostile state, Egypt's life is over. For this reason, all of Egypt's efforts are to secure life in the coming future." The Foreign Affairs Ministry Permanent Secretary, Patrick Mogoya, says they consulted widely and Uganda's decision will not affect relations with Cairo.
I don't think so. The most important thing is that we waited for some time. We've been able to explain to them. We have discussed. We've looked at technical issues related to the issue of the Nile and the issue of the Nile waters. And so it's a decision that the government has taken after thorough consultations and the Egyptian government being informed of what we are doing. So consultations can continue, we can continue engaging, but the time is now right that we move on.
Ambassador Mugoya said the new agreement is currently before the ministry.
Once Cabinet approved ratification of the CFA, Cabinet extract, which is the document which comes out of the meeting, has been forwarded to the Minister of Foreign Affairs, because it's the Minister of Foreign Affairs who ratifies all these agreements on behalf of government. So the ratification instrument is being prepared and will be signed by the Minister of Foreign Affairs on behalf of Uganda. And once that is done, we will have that instrument deposited at the African Union, making it now legally known that Uganda has formally ratified and deposited its instrument.
In June 2017, President Museveni convened a high-level summit to try to iron out outstanding differences, particularly between Egypt and Ethiopia, over the Nile and over the new agreement, but it ended in a deadlock.
We should work together to transform the Nile Basin countries into first world countries. In other words, do away with the backwardness, industrialize the Nile Basin so that we have got modern societies. That was the main thing we started today. We've just started, we shall continue.
Behind closed doors, Egypt's President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi and the former Ethiopian Prime Minister Haile Mariam Desalegn, two principals whose countries have for decades sparred over sharing the Nile waters, disagreed on almost everything. The new agreement outlines 10 principles, among others, not causing significant damage, good faith, fair and appropriate use of the water, development, trust building, dam security and unity and territorial integrity of the states. Egypt's main concern is Article 14, Clause B of the new agreement, which espouses the principles of equitable and reasonable utilization of the Nile, especially by upstream Nile countries such as Uganda and Ethiopia. The Nile's annual flow volume was estimated at 85 billion cubic meters at the Aswan High Dam by the colonial agreements. The agreements allocated Egypt 75% of the river waters, or 55 billion cubic meters, and Sudan 25%, or 18.5 billion cubic meters. The British colonial administration reasoned that other countries sharing the river can always rely on other sources such as lakes, swamps, and rainwater for fresh water. What this means is that upstream countries like Uganda cannot undertake any activities which could significantly affect Egypt's and Sudan's allocated water quotas. The new agreement, however, allows the upstream countries to undertake the activities as long as they consult and notify other members, especially those that significantly depend on the river. Nevertheless, the Nile Basin Initiative Executive Director, Professor Saif Ahmed Abdallah, says bickering is not an option.
This amount of water, if we don't cooperate, the limited amount of water is going to cause differences among the countries. So there is a need for cooperation on the Nile, because this amount of water is only 5%. The amount of water which is running on the river, is flowing in on the river, is only 5% of the amount of rain that falls. If we can cooperate and get another 5%, it means that we are going to get another Nile. So this is, so cooperation is a must among the Nile Basin countries. It's not a choice, just you choose or not. We have to cooperate.
According to NBI, the Nile Basin is already under strain from, among others, high population growth, climate change, and degradation, which are likely to get worse as the countries sharing the river continue to bicker. Currently, Ethiopia has the highest population in the basin of 94 million, closely followed by Egypt with 84 million, DR Congo 70 million, Uganda 40 million, South Sudan and Rwanda with 11 million respectively, Sudan with 38 million, Burundi 10 million, Kenya 44 million, and Tanzania close to 50 million. By 2030, according to NBI, the basin's population is expected to clock 648 million, and by 2050, it will be nearing 1 billion. The growth in population means more demand for water for consumption, agriculture, and urbanization, which will put more stress on the river. Although the Nile is considered the world's longest river, in terms of water discharge, it ranks in the 25th position and the 5th in Africa, behind River Congo, River Volta in West Africa, River Zambezi in Zambia, and the Niger River. Professor Seif said the new agreement could rally all countries towards a common agenda.
This Nile Basin initiative, when was established in 1999 in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, all the countries agreed to one vision. For the first time to agree on one vision, to see. So I believe that the support for this technical cooperation is very important as a foundation for the political one. With technical cooperation, the countries, they are going to realize that to optimize the benefits, they have to work together.
For the new agreement to come into force, it has to be ratified by at least 6 members, the remaining being only Burundi. The uncertainty of when Burundi will ratify is further complicated by the political bickering and maneuvering in the region, which keeps the stakes going high. Notwithstanding, water sharing remains a global problem, especially with the ever-increasing impacts of climate change, and analysts have warned that this could ignite more wars in the future. Frederick Mosi, NTV Panorama.